always feels really good to be adding more to the Greece playlist. It's up in the top right if you haven't caught it yet. I don't know if we're going to get some flack for the conspicuous absence of the dodecahedrons, but our current pinboard of places we've been in Greece looks like this. And for the next few episodes, we were finally getting a look at the Cyclades. And for a trip that ended up getting rebooked 3 times, long story, from the original plan of going in 2020, fair to say we'd been anticipating this one since forever. However, Santorini, as you might know, is quite a loaded topic. There is discourse that hangs over the island. Basically, every day, several kilometres worth of Facebook comments opining both best place on Earth being countered by overcrowded, ruined, go to all the other Greek islands instead. I mean, the trend is, amongst Greeks and the locals, they appear to take something of a dim view of it, or at least what it has become, whilst anyone who publicly posts their Greece itineraries can never resist adding it on. This is not a big place. Never more than about 6 kilometres wide, it's 76 square kilometres, and for context, just the Bournemouth Pool Christchurch area is pretty much exactly double that. And yet it's become this poster child for the entirety of Greece and tourism, or even mass tourism in general. Yeah, here's a game you can play. Next time you're watching a YouTube channel that relies on stock assets and they mention Greece, set a timer till they cut to the blue domes of Santorini. You know, iconographically, it's become to Greece what the Eiffel Tower has become to France. And with it, it's attracted a lot of people wanting to do things like this. Yeah, which sort of begs the question, how much attention should you or shouldn't you draw when you're visiting another country? Again, the jury in the comments is split around 50-50 between "Yas, girl, slay, ignore the haters" on one side, and that's a choice on the other. But we're getting too granular too soon. We were visiting not in August, where most of the aggro really heats up as the streets get crowded, but in April, which is off-season, but has a bit better chance of nice conditions than, say, like the dead of winter in January. Remember, this might be the Mediterranean, but it's not the centre of Spain. The Cyclades are famous for being pretty windy, and there's no guarantee of sunshine and heat at all. Okay, so we came in for a slightly bumpy landing. I was aware that Santorini is pretty high in elevation, but the difference between the highland and this coastal flat plain was striking. And right up front, we're going to need something of a history/geography lesson about this point. Santorini is in a broken ring shape thanks to a massive volcanic eruption around something like 1500 BC. Estimates drift this way and that. And so most of the images you see of Santorini are of the towns perched around the edge of the caldera of this now long extinct volcano. As you'll see, it's pretty dramatic in elevation, and perhaps most famously, because of its west-facing slopes, it's rather a great place to catch a sunset or two. Well, after a passport queue about the same duration as our flight, the bus was gone and we grudgingly got a cab, which was frankly too much, but there it is. It's funny, your first impression of the isle as the eastern side flashed past is rather prosaic. It's not unpleasant, but it's quite a contrast to the much more photographed views looking west. The white walls of Fira appeared on the hill with a bank of clouds. The first couple of days on the island were promising less than spectacular weather. The main centre of the island is Fira, and this is where we were staying first. Again, your initial view of Fira when you pull in isn't exactly a vision. The spectacular views are now hidden behind the tangle of shops and restaurants. But we didn't sprint for the views just yet. We stopped off for a gyros, and that made everything feel right again. As you walk around, you notice there's a lot of attention to aesthetics, which is not a huge surprise since Santorini is pretty much the glowing centre of the universe as far as Insta is concerned. We linked to our accommodation, which was pretty nice. I don't know if I'm too easily impressed, but if anyone puts even just a little effort into a room, then it seems above average to me. My bar is pretty much at no infestations and no communicable diseases from the bed linen. Otherwise, I pride myself on being able to sleep in less than ideal accommodation. Then we dropped in on Coffee Island, just because it's always great to get back there, and got the first Fredo of the trip. Then we sort of followed our noses to the spectacular views, and here we are. And after you've spent a day or two, you start to appreciate a good aspect of the centre of the island, because there's quite an art of finding the gaps in the buildings. That said, while there are footpaths that snake all over the caldera rim, it's hard to pass what is an alley to a private residence and what is a public thoroughfare. More often than not, something that looks like a private lane on further examination turns out to be the continuation of a public path. But the residents have put up with a lot, so please try not to be too much of a nuisance. Looking back at the footage from the first day, it's actually better than I recall. I was keeping my powder dry regarding some sweeping shots of the caldera, as on the Monday, the grey, specifically to the west, was sucking a lot of the colour out. Funny enough, to all other points of the compass, it looked fine. Low-angle flag shot. Well, quick Greek coffee at a place that didn't look too expensive. Anytime you want to sit in Santorini, it comes at a little bit of a premium. You get used to it, but espressos starting from, €3 to €4 throws you off the first few times. Though, I've got to say, reading this script back, I have to chuckle. Not only because inflation has got so much worse since we filmed this over a year ago, but also having now been to Switzerland where, when exchanged for sterling, the strength of the Swiss franc means espressos start from about £4. In fact, the only thing in the country that isn't double the cost is beer, curiously. Anyway, all of which makes Santorini look much more reasonable by comparison. Not cheap, but, could be worse. It could be, London, basically. It's a stupid habit Brits have when we go on holiday. We're like, how dare you charge me the same amount I'd pay when I was at home? I'm so insulted. Well, spots of rain started appearing. Truthfully, it was a rather poor attempt at rain, but it was rain nonetheless. And when we headed out to a restaurant later, it had a proper go at it, with rivers appearing on the roads down the hillsides. We had a moussaka, which was on the cheaper side and very tasty, if not over fancy. So we had our guard up a little, expecting that we might stumble into an extremely expensive restaurant by accident, so we were cherry-picking the cheaper spots as best we could. Kept it in neutral the first day. Wasn't the greatest of weather, so just a first peek, and Fira was pretty great in the evening. Then, sunrise in Fira, nice colours with the cloud cover, even a little on the chilly side. Had an espresso from one of the couple of bakeries that was open at 7 a.m, but while it had a good flavour, the girl dunked a bunch of extra boiling water on top, which, come on, why you gotta do that? But, fine, okay. Yeah, it felt really good to walk around in the early morning, but at the earliest opportunity, we hopped on a bus heading south. By the way, whatever your Santorini plans are, first thing you do, go to Fira bus station, mobile phone snap all the timetables. Fira acts as something of a central spoke of the network. Everything heads out from there. More on the buses in a bit, but they're pretty brilliant. So we're winding to the southern and western end of the C shape that is Santorini. Santorini is really quite dark in colour, which, tracks because volcano. Also explains why this was an island well worth inhabiting, as all that volcanic soil, very cultivatable, if that is an adjective. Something I had to look up later. You got all these fields and fields worth of vines, but instead of growing to about head height, they're all coiled up and sitting just a few centimetres above the ground, presumably to counter the wind. So we got off near Cycladic, and I was buzzing like an infant on Christmas Eve. This was ticking off a site I've been wanting to see for years. It's essentially the Pompeii of Santorini, though instead of being 2,000 years old, it's 3,500 years old. It's a remarkable place. Seeing the ruins disappear into the distance under this protective structure, I will say, if historic sites are not usually your bag, there's no shame in struggling to pass exactly what you're looking at. But the fact that multi-storey buildings from around 4 millennia ago have survived, somewhat at height, is a near miracle. And the craziest thing, these vast excavations represent something like a single-digit percentage of the whole site. The amount that may still be under the ground. In future, we'll go into more detail on what's there, but seeing that was goals. After that, we took a wander to the coast, past the village of Cycladic, and finally got a look at Santorini unfurling like a scroll, with the white houses of Fira and Ia dusting the top of the caldera. It's a breathtaking view of the island, but at this point, you can't really see it properly on camera. The winds would practically take your head off. So, bus back. Even in April, there are about 10 buses a day to every major town on the island, so you can absolutely lean on buses for a lot of your stay. And with tickets around $160, it's desperately reasonable. We were due showers, and the clouds had begun getting slightly more threatening, but even so, there was a lot of sunshine still around. However, to hit some of our other waypoints that weren't quite as well served by the bus routes, it was hire car time. While perhaps ill-advised with the wind, opening times forced our hand a bit to aim for one of the highest points on the island. Down to the southeast, next to the village of Kamari, another of the island's most significant ancient sites. Just a quick Freddo espresso later, and it was time to tackle an eye-watering zigzag slope up. The original plan had been to walk it, but we hadn't clocked that you could actually drive up there, so that was infinitely preferable, if a bit of a nail-biter. Up there, the wind was legit brutal, but at least blowing up the slope from the east, so it was blowing us into the mountain rather than pitching us off into the abyss. This is ancient Fira, made more confusing by the island interchangeably being known as Fira and its main town being Fira. But having seen Cycladic that morning, which was the highest priority for this trip, ancient Fira was a bonus. Now, without digging into the whole history of the site here, It was great, loads to see, particularly spectacular how much it spreads out and how many excellent ruins there are. Anyway, the mountaintop setting really makes it. There's also beautiful views of Kamari and the rather strange sensation of looking down on the aircraft coming into land at Santorini Airport. It's one of those things, the image you get fed of Santorini is just this, perhaps a little superficial Insta spot. It has fantastic historical stuff here. I mean, the site beat out most of what you can see on somewhere like Zakynthos, for example. That has some, but nowhere near as spectacular as this or this. So once again, down the zigzag, we hadn't actually eaten, so we wandered down the beach towards the few restaurants that were trading. These deserted units, empty decks and unused parasols, all being a powerful visual metaphor for, I don't know, nothing in particular. Seasonal consumer trends, maybe. This is not the most vain of espresso vanity shots I've ever taken, but, got a pizza, which was fine. It was nice to just find a meal for around €10. So Kamari Beach was very nice. Although the sun was making more of an appearance, don't be fooled by the blue. It was not warm. We didn't actually swim this entire trip. It was pretty chilly, so if that's your thing, just bear in mind April might not be the best shout. The beach there is kind of black, like several of the beaches in Santorini. The grains are too small to be gravel, but it's too large to be sand. It's quite pleasant to sit on. So, back to Fira, parked on the edge of town. Parking is a bit tricky, so, just be prepared to walk a bit. We spent the late afternoon and evening walking between Fira and Imero Vigli. In places as maze-like as Santorini, you'd kind of expect it to be a series of cul-de-sacs and dead ends, but remarkably, there are very deliberate trails that allow you to just keep walking around the edge of the caldera uninterrupted, which is a very pleasing bit of joined-up thinking. It's a bit of a trek, probably about an hour there and back as far as Scaros Rock, which makes for a pretty prominent midpoint of the caldera. Again, this path is not always easy to perceive, and the signage demonstrates some of the annoyance the local businesses have to deal with. It's a funny experience because the slope does not afford much privacy for all of the luxury suites with pools that ring the route, and unless you forked out a 4-figure sum, that's probably not for the likes of you or I. Imero Vigli itself boasts the ruins of a Venetian castle. They're somewhat thin on the ground, but not that it mattered. It turned into a lovely evening, and we got some of our first proper looks at Ia. Well, wandered back, feeling great. If anything, the caldera is a great social equaliser. I mean, sure, if you want to sit down and enjoy the sunset, dishes probably start around €20, and if you want a glass of wine, you might want to consult a mortgage advisor. But the path that snakes along the rim is open to all, free of charge, and its west-facing aspect makes it the perfect stadium for the sunset. We got a gyros for under €5 on the route back and enjoyed just that. It was an absolutely beautiful one, and there's this perfect little public place for us to sit, eat, and enjoy it. Dusk, too, was on fire with beautiful colours. Yeah, that was a really special evening. We also got ourselves a bit of a treat. When on Crete, I'd become rather fond of Rako Mellow, a form of Reiki with honey, so I was pretty thrilled that we could get it here. Funny enough, ignore the famous grouse branding, this had slightly herby, kind of sort of like a Jaeger kind of flavour, much less sweet than the varieties we'd had before. Didn't really have a natural place in the script to put this, I just think we need a supercut at this point. Just to say, the music you're hearing in the background is ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. So, up again at dawn, was feeling a little fragile, so I actually got a cappuccino for a change. Probably a mistake, but it was essentially fine. I've always advocated on the channel that getting up for sunrises and seeing the town at dawn is its own reward. It's not even an avoiding people thing, but in a tourist area where exclusivity is priced at a premium, just setting an early alarm and having the town all to yourself, that's all I've ever needed. Will say, and never once did I complain, but this denim shirt being the only warm garment I brought made these early mornings pretty chilly. The locals were all in these sort of thick coats and fleeces, but I mean, that said, you see people in the same attire in Athens when it's 35 degrees, so I guess that's not that unusual. One of the biggest highlights of the entire trip, we would have hit this while the weather was less good, but we couldn't, as heads up, it's closed on Tuesdays. The Museum of Ancient Fira, and oh my goodness, The whole place is just, chef's kiss. The perfect selection of Cycladic and Minoan archaeology from Santorini, including the frescoes from Akrotiri. I mean, for artwork that has survived 3,500 years, it's a must-see. Very accessible and not even expensive to get in. Absolutely unmissable. So, a couple of Easter eggs to hit in the hire car, but a wrong turn turned out to give us some of the best views of the Caldera yet. We headed to Emporio. We knew this going in, but quite a number of the castles, quote marks, in the Cyclades are absolute hide-and-seek champions, having long ago sort of morphed into a cluster of different buildings, the original defensive form being near impossible to perceive. And that's pretty much the same thing here. We took several wrong turns trying to find this in the streets, but Emporio is very lovely, and there was just time to go and see the chain of windmills on the hillside behind the town. Then it was time to return the hire car. We had a little time before we had to go in the afternoon, so feeling impulsive, we headed to one of the restaurants with a view that wasn't too pricey. And we actually had some really good pasta and yemista from there. Not all that much. Quick espresso, and it was time to get out of Fira and off Santorini, as in the next couple of days we were exploring some other nearby islands in the Cyclades. So here's the thing, I thought we were going to get through all the Santorini stuff in one episode. As it turns out, well, check the timestamp. Nowadays, I'm a more disciplined gent, and if we're only halfway there, that's going to turn this into a 30-minute episode. And really, who has time? Apparently very few people. Yeah, seriously, go and watch the Lake Garda episode. It's a good one. I don't know why it got so decked by the algorithm. Anyway, the next episode will follow us to Paros, and we'll slip Eos in as well while we're at it. Then, just as we did, we'll circle back to Santorini and finish up in Ia to see if it's much different from Fira. So if this video's been out a few weeks, you can find those in the playlist along with numerous other episodes we've done all across Crete, Thessaloniki in the north, the Ionian Islands in the west, Athens and the Peloponnese, and even though it's not part of the Greek state, we've also got loads of episodes on Cyprus. We also mentioned the Bandcamp. You can support us there. I mean, that would mean a huge amount. Otherwise, find us on Bluesky. We've recently migrated a lot of activity there, and feel free to share your own experiences of Santorini below. I'm sure a bunch of you have already been. Otherwise, we'll catch you again very soon.